This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Brucham Haba, and welcome everyone. So this is the penultimate shir before Purim. Haba Aleinu Tova. That means the second to last shir. We have really a very important topic this evening, and of major historical and contemporary significance, especially for those who pay attention to what's going on in the world. We have a concept, Masayavai Siman Labanim. So even though whatever the episodes in the Torah that took place, they happened a long time ago, nevertheless, not only do they have relevance, not only do we say history repeats itself, but actually whatever is recorded in the Torah creates the history of what will later happen for the Jewish people. Okay, so we're going to examine a pasuk in the Megillah, in Parak Tes, pasuk Aleph. The Megillah tells us like this: Uv'shnei masar chodesh, in the 9th month, in the 12th month, Hu chodesh Adar, the month of Adar, B'shloisha asar yom ba, in the 13th day of Adar, Asher higia dvar hamelech v'dasei lehei asais, on the day that the edict of the king was supposed to be carried out, on the day that the enemies of the Jews planned to rule over us, and it was just the opposite, that the Jews ruled over Haman, they ruled over their enemies. So basically, in a nutshell, on the day the enemies were supposed to harm us, we instead ruled over our enemies. And if you look carefully at this pasuk, you'll notice that the use of the word for enemy switches from the beginning of the pasuk to the end of the pasuk. It says, on the day that the enemy of the Jews planned to rule over them, but the word the pasuk uses, oyev, is just the opposite. What happened? Asher yishlatu haYehudim hema b'soineim. The oyev turned into a soine. Now, in many languages, there's a concept of a synonym. In Hebrew, it's called, Lashon HaKodesh, it's called a Shemos HaNerdafim. However, the opinion of the Malbim is that in Lashon HaKodesh, there's no such thing as Shemos HaNerdafim. There's no such thing as synonyms. You see, the difference between Lashon HaKodesh and all other languages is that all other languages are just a consensus that people agree to refer to something with a certain word. Lashon HaKodesh is not a consensus. It inherently means that because we have a rule that God created the world with Lashon HaKodesh. So there are no synonyms. If there are two words that seem to mean the same thing, they obviously have a nuance of difference. So why does the pasuk say, on the day that the oyev, the enemy of the Jew, planned to rule over us, it should say, why does it switch it to soinehem? Either they're an oyev, or they're a soine. Why the switchover? Why oyev in the beginning of the pasuk and soine in the end of the pasuk? Well, the Vilna Gaon has very important interpretation, and that is, the Gaon says that there's a difference between an oyev and a soine. An oyev is somebody who actually inflicts harm, who wants to do bad. An oyev is somebody who would like to cause pain and suffering. That is the definition of oyev. A soine is not somebody who actually would cause harm and would inflict pain, but a soine is sort of a bystander who watches in enjoyment and doesn't like the person, and therefore when the person is harmed, they're happy about it. So just to give an example, you could say the Yishmaelim are our oyevim, and the Europeans maybe are our soinim, something like that. In other words, the oyev is someone who actually harms. The soine is the bystander who enjoys it. Okay, so the Gra interprets the pasuk like this. Says the Vilna Gaon, Bayoim, on the day Asher Sibru oyev Yehudim l'shleipahem, on the day that the ones who actually wanted to inflict harm, planned to do bad to us, God turned it around such to the extreme that we ruled over not only the Oivim, we even ruled over the Sainim. Even the people who merely were watching, would have been watching in enjoyment, we ruled over them as well. Okay, that's how the Gra interprets the pasuk. But for those who have been listening to the Shiurim over the last couple of years, may remember that the words Oyev and Soine are words that we've frequently discussed. And that is, even though the interpretation that we just gave is the interpretation of the Vilna Gaon, There is a classic interpretation of the word oyev and sainei, which is given by the Rishonim, and this is something we've discussed at least in 3 different shiurim. So if you want to look it up, you want to go back to the archives, Parshas Maseh from like 7 years ago and 4 years ago, we did a topic on the Dal and Malchios, and we did a topic on Pesach, on the Chad Gadya, and we once spoke about it in a shiur in Memphis, Tennessee, for those who are following. Well, we spoke about it 3 times. But obviously, Ein Beis HaMedrash B'li Chidosh. So we're going to explain now the classic interpretation of the Rishonim of the Oyev and the Sainei. Take a look at number 3. It's a pasuk in Nitzavim. After it talks about that Klal Yisrael will do tshuva, and the pasuk says, "Umal Hashem leikecha eslavav v'eslavav zarecha." God will circumcise our heart. The pasuk says like this: "B'nosan Hashem leikecha." God, your God will place es kol ha'olos ha'ela, all of these curses, alo yevecha, on your enemies, v'al soineecha, and on those who hate you, asher redafucha, who pursue you. That all the curses of the Teicha that were destined to come upon you, God will turn the table and put them on your oivim and on your sainim. Okay. Comes Ramban, and the Ramban says, who are the oivim and who are the sainim? The Ramban says, V'hine oivecha v'sainecha remez l'shtei ha'umais. It's a remez to the 2 nations asher yirdefu tamen achareno, that constantly pursue us. So oivecha v'sainecha is a remez to the 2 nations who constantly pursue us. The only thing the Ramban didn't do was he didn't identify who these 2 nations are. But he sort of narrowed it down. So out of the 72 nations, he narrowed it down to 2 of them. However, we still have no clue. Who are they? Are they the Japanese? North Korea? Who exactly are the 2 nations that always pursue us? The Ramban doesn't say. But there is a very well-known comment of Rabbeinu Bechaye. Rabbeinu Bechaye, one of the classic Rishonim, I believe a Talmud of the Rashba. Rabbeinu Bechaye's commentary on the Torah is a very important commentary. In fact, the Heilig Sam Sofer, every Friday night for 40 years, it's brought down the Hakdam of Sam Sofer, would learn Rabbeinu Bechaye ala Torah. Every year he would find new Chidushim. And Rabbeinu Bechaye tells us that the Oyev and the Sainei, you know which 2 nations they are? They are Yishmael and Esav. Those are the 2 main nations that throughout our history have pursued us. But then the Ramban identifies further. Oyevecha is Yishmael, Soineecha is Esav. And the Ramban says that, let me tell you, this is what the Gemara talks about. Now, amazingly, the Rabbeinu Bechaye quotes a Gemara that we don't have. It's not in Talmud Bavli, not in the Vilna edition, not in the Narada edition, not even in the Shadenstein edition. This Gemara does not appear. It's an agada to Gemara in Bava Basra, and the famous Gemara is of Rabbi Bar Chana, but it's not in our Shas. It was taken out. So let me tell you the story. Rabbi Bar Chana was traveling in the desert, and he saw 2 geese. You know what a goose is? A duck, tachka, a geese, a goose. And the Shamti got fired, they lost their feathers. Why did they lose their feathers? Mishamnayu, they were obese. They were fat geese. And so these fat geese, they were so heavy they lost their feathers. V'kanagid chuta deduv shaminayu, and a thin line of honey, Rabbi Bar Chana extracted from them. And I said to them, will we have a share with you in the world to come? And they said the following. They didn't talk. Obviously, geese don't talk. What do you think they're going to say? So they didn't talk. One of them raised their wing, and the other one raised their itzma. In English, they raised their rump. Okay, that's how we'll translate it. So one of them raised their wing, and one of them raised their rump. And then Rabbi Bar Chana told the story to Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Eliezer said, Klal Yisrael is going to pay the price. So it's one of these enigmatic agadatas. It's so enigmatic, it didn't even make it into the Gemara. We don't have it in our Gemara. So anyway, says Rabbeinu Bechaye, what does this mean? Who are these geese? Says Rabbeinu Bechaye, these fat geese are the 2 superpowers of the world. Who are they? Esav and Yishmael. And they're so obese because they're so rich, they're so full of power. Whether it's their oil deposits, whether it's their money, whether it's their land holdings, whatever it may be, the obesity of these two geese refer to the historic success of Esav and Yishmael. And what does it mean, one of them lifted up their wing, and the other one lifted up their rump? Says Rabbeinu Bechaye, what it means they lifted up their wing is Yishmael lifted up their wing. Because in the future they're going to come flapping their wings and come flying to us. And they're going to give us animals, they're going to give us karbanos. And they're going to convert. And they're going to wear tefillin. What does it have to do with the wings? Because in Gemara and Shabbos, Elisha Bal Kinafayim. Kinafayim, wings represents tefillin. Now this is a pella. Because if you look at the Kliyaka and the Chidah, Kliyaka and Parshas Toldos, we have a tradition that Yishmaelim never convert. You know, throughout history, all the converts come from Esav. Shmai and Avtalion, and Unklus, and Rav Meir, and Nero Kezar. We don't have converts from Yishmael. In fact, what I have a very hard time understanding is Rabbeinu Bechai himself at the end of the piece says, they're never going to convert, they're going to just go straight to Gehenna. So if anyone out there has an explanation of this, Rabbeinu Bechai, but let's read it out. So when it says that one of the geese will lift up its wings, they're going to come flying to us, they're going to convert. And the other goose is going to lift up its rump, that refers to Esav, who they're going to have a bris milah, and they're going to join with us, and we're going to take their power. And all of their dominion and success that they have today, Rabbi Barachana extracted this line of honey, and ultimately we take over their power. Says Rabbeinu Bechaye, what is the difference between an oyev and a soinei? Oyev, he said, is Yishmael, soinei is Esav. Says Rabbeinu Bechaye, now I can ask you a question. This is the historic debate. Who's worse, Esav or Yishmael? And usually the answer to that question is, it really depends where you come from. It depends how old you are. It depends where you grew up. It depends whether you're Ashkenazi or Sephardi. You ask a Polish Yid in 1946, who's worse, Esav or Yishmael? The answer is obvious. You ask a Jew who lives in Israel in the 30s, in Hebron, who's worse, Esav or Yishmael? The answer to him is obvious. Yeah, it really depends. You ask a Jew in 1492, who's worse? You ask a Jew in Yemen, who's worse? So there's always this classic debate, who's worse, Esav and Yishmael? And yet, predominantly, most Rishonim say Yishmael is much worse. Now, what I found amazing was the Kloisenberger Rebbe, who suffered terribly during the Holocaust. He also writes Yishmael is much worse. But anyway, Rabbeinu Bechaye says we're going to label Yishmael Oyev, we're going to label Esav Soinei. Why? Because an oyev is much worse than a soinei. Because a soinei will harm you, but there could be some rachmanis. But an oyev has eternal, unflinching hatred. It's not tempered with any rachamim. In fact, the word oyev comes from the word avoy. When you fall into the hands of a Yishmaeli, you scream oyev avoy. That's the root of the word. However, Edom, he proves throughout Tanakh, is called the soinei. The Esav Sonesi, the Navi says, the Haftarah Parshas Toldos. Tachas Senua Kitival. So Yishmael is called the Oyev, and Esav is called the Soinei. Says Rabbeinu Bechaye, that is why there is an expression, Tachas Edom v'lo Tachas Yishmael. Throughout history, Jews have always said, I'd rather be under the dominion of Edom than under the dominion of the Yishmaelim. Now today, in 2017, yeah, we see that. The Western world is tolerant of us. But Yishmaelim, that's what we're suffering from today. 70 years ago, it was the opposite. So it's this classic debate. But Rabbeinu Bechaye records for all time, Yishmael is worse than Esav. In fact, we know throughout Chumash that the oyev is worse than the soinei. Because when it comes to the soinei, it's al ribeim l'soinei. For the enemy, for the soinei, God punishes 4 generations. For the oyev, it's, the pasuk says, Ve'oyvei Hashem ki kar karim kalu ba'ashan kalu. And very interestingly, these 2 nations are alluded to, says Rabbeinu Bechaye, throughout Tanakh. The Navi Yeshaya says, HaMiskadshim v'HaMitaharim, the ones who sanctify themselves are Edom, they like to cross themselves. The Yishmaelim like to purify themselves, they wash their hands and their feet, but says Ramban, but they never cleanse their hearts, which is the Iker. And we're sort of in the middle. Even on the calendar, You have Yishmael on the left side on Friday. You have Edom on the right side of Sunday. Rabbeinu Bechaye establishes the Oyev is who? Yishmael. Esav is the Sinai. You know, who are we to inject ourselves into this? But it would seem that this is the correct interpretation. I always think, does anybody remember after the agada? So Avraham takes with him Eliezer and Yishmael and Yitzchak. And then he tells Yishmael, Shavu lachem payin achamar. You're the donkey, you stay behind. And then he takes Yitzchak to the agada. And what bracha does Yitzchak get at the agada? V'yirash zaracha eshar oivav. Meaning you're going to one-up Yishmael. So to me that's a raya that Yishmael is called the Oyev. But when Lavan and Besuel send Rivka to marry Yitzchak, the bracha they give, V'yirash zaracha eshar soinov. Because Rivka has to deal with an Esav. So to me that's clear what Rabbeinu Bechaye is saying, that the Oyev is Yishmael and the Sinai is Esav. What's very interesting is that Rabbeinu Bechaye wrote another sefer called Kad HaKemach, a sefer of Jewish thought, of Musar, and in the Kad HaKemach Rabbeinu Bechaye writes the exact opposite. Rabbeinu Bechaye says the Oyev is Bnei Esav and the Sinai is Bnei Yishmael. Is it a stira? Is one of them a printer's error? I'm just presenting you the facts. Rabbeinu Bechaye writes in different places, maybe it's not, maybe it's movable. Maybe it just depends. Maybe sometimes Yishmael is the Oyev and sometimes Esav is the Oyev. The Ramban, if anyone remembers, we had many weeks ago, about 6 months ago, we spoke out, the disputation in Barcelona, the Sefer HaVikuach of the Ramban. And the Ramban identifies the Oyev is Esav and the Sinai is Yishmael. The opposite of Rabbeinu Bechaye al HaTorah. In fact, there's a sefer by Rabbi Yaakov Chaim Sefer, a descendant of the Kaf HaChaim. He writes very interesting svarim. So he feels that this Ramban and the Sefer Kuach, it must be a printer's error. How could anyone say that the Oyev is Esav and the Sinai is Yishmael? Many people bring a proof from the following. You remember in Parshas Vayishlach when Yaakov Avinu encounters Esav and Esav gives him a big kiss, and what does it have on the word Vayishakeu in the Sefer Torah? Dots. So Rashi says, what do dots do? Dots say the opposite of what you would have thought. So either the pshat is that typically you would have thought he hates us. Typically, it says he kissed him. It says he kissed him. So if he says he kissed him, then he probably kissed him. The dot says it wasn't Belev Shalem. But then Rashi brings out another pshat. Says Rashi, look at number 9. Amar Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Reb Shimon ben Yochai says, Halacha hi biyodua. It is a halacha. She'esav soinei leYaakov. That Esav hates Yaakov. What does Rashi say? What is Esav? How does Rashi identify Esav? Soinei. Soinei. Esav is a soinei. It's in their blood. By the way, it's an amazing thing. The fact that Goyim hate us, we're going to discuss this in a bit. Probably the topic that there are more books on than any other subject is anti-Semitism. And everybody has their theory, the sociological reasons and the philosophical reasons and the ethnicities. And Rashi says, no, it's not about anything. They don't hate us because we're powerful, and they don't hate us because we're leeches on society. Neither are correct. Why do they hate us? Because they just do. My grandfather's memoirs after the war, so I think the Americans captured a Nazi, and this Nazi tells my grandfather, don't hold it against us. It's not our fault. It's in our blood. It's not our fault. It's in our blood. That's what Rashi's saying. It's in their blood. They just hate us. But Rashi's identifying who is the Sinai. Esav is the Sinai. Lamaisa, Rabbeinu Bechaye. So we have like conflicting sources. Who's the Oyev? Who's the Sinai? Rabbeinu Bechaye in Parshas Nitzavim, Yishmael is the Oyev. Esav is the Sinai. Rabbeinu Bechaye in the Kad HaKemach contradicts himself. The Ramban says, like the Rabbeinu Bechaye in the Kad HaKemach, that Yishmael is the Sinai and Esav is the Oyev. It's very interesting. Rabbeinu Bechaye in Parshas Vayera, When Avram Avinu sends away Yishmael, so Avram Avinu gives him bread and then he sends him away. Look what Rabbi Bechaya writes. Why is Avram Avinu sending away his son? He says, Avraham foresaw in the future that Yishmael V'chi yisneu oisam sina gedoyla she'ein uma ba'olam sheyusoinim liYisrael k'bnei Yishmael. So Rabbeinu Bechaya maybe here is identifying Yishmael as what? A soine. And what do you do with a soine? It says in Mishlei, Imrav soinacha hachilei olechem. If your enemy is hungry, feed him bread. That's a little bit mashma. Rabbeinu Bechaya is identifying Yishmael as a soine. Interesting, the Rambam, and this will be the last source here about this concept, who's the oyev, who's the soine. The Rambam in the Geras Teman, look at number 11. He says, my brothers, you should know that because of our many sins, God has cast us in a nation, the nation of Yishmael, that are the most evil nation on the world. This is the reference to the pasuk Ve'oyeveinu plilim. So the Rambam is identifying Yishmael as what? Oyev. V'shaloi amda al Yisrael uma yoiser oyeves mimena. There is no nation that hates us more and tries to diminish us and lower us like Yishmael. And of all the tsaras that David HaMelech foresaw in Tehillim, right? We know Tehillim was written, David HaMelech prophecies all the future tsaras that it will befall Klal Yisrael. At one point, David HaMelech cannot contain himself, and he says, look in the second line, Oyali, woe to me, ki garti meshech, that our sojourning has drawn out. Shachanti, look where we have to live, in Mahalei Kedar. By the way, where's Kedar? Who comes from Kedar? Yishmael. But specifically, who came from Kedar? Somebody who the Rambam refers to as the Meshuggah. Who is that? Bahamei ben Yavin. Yeah? That's the Rambam. That's the nicest thing the Rambam was able to say about him. Probably if they would have known that, they wouldn't have honored the Rambam in Egypt on, the 800th year since his birth. If they would have known what the Rambam writes about this gentleman. But the Rambam feels that the most difficult nation that we have to endure and suffer from is Yishmael. And then he says, you know what the worst thing about Yishmael is? And this is like almost pure prophecy. He says, Rambam, you know what the worst thing about Yishmael is? He says, unbelievable. He says, "Va'anachnu ba'odeinu soivlim shibudam v'kizveihem v'shikrusam lamala michalteinu." It's their lies that they make up about us. They don't. When we suffer, they say that never happened. It's intolerable. The Rambam says the lies that Yishmael hurls on us, and the Rambam quotes a drasha, a very interesting drasha, when it talks about the descendants of Yishmael. So the three names, Mishma, Duma, Masa. And there's a drasha. Mishma, basically, how do we react to Yishmael? We listen to the insult. Duma, we zip the mouth. Masa, we tolerate it. But bottom line is, according to the Rishonim, the Oyev and the Soine refers to Esav and Yishmael. Most Rishonim learn the Oyev is Yishmael and the Soine is Esav, but it could be switched around. Well, Moreover, Rabbi say, how could you not help but think, if the Oyev, let's say, is Yishmael, and the Soine is Esav, then how are you going to fit that into the pasuk in the Megillah? Ba'yoim asher sibru oyevei haYehudim lishloit bahem v'nahafaychu asher yishlutu haYehudim hema b'seinehem. How are you going to fit Esav and Yishmael into the pasuk? I understand, you wanted Haman. Haman is from Esav, so Haman will call him the Soine. No problem. But who exactly is the Oyev? There's no Yishmael in the Purim story. It's Achashverosh. He's a Persian, as they say in Brooklyn. Right? He's from Paras. Why would we refer to him? I mean, one of them is a Soine and one of them is an Oyev. So we'll give Haman the Zechus to be the Soine. But who's the Oyev? Who's the Oyev? According to the Rishon, according to the Ramban, according to Rabbeinu Bechaya, Oyev and Soine is Esav and Yishmael. So we got a Haman in the story, but there's no Yishmaeli in the story. And this is really a question that I heard a share from Rabbi David Cohen, not the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron, who we usually quote. Rabbi David Cohen, the Rav of Gvul Yavitz in Coney Island, he gave a share, and I heard it. So I called him up recently, and I wanted to know if what he says is in print. So he said, yes, it's in the Sefer Oyel David, the 8th volume that ArtScroll published. I said, how do I get it? He said, call up ArtScroll. No. I said, I need it soon. I need it, giving a share. So he said, come to my house. So I drove to his house, and he gave me the Sefer, and it's on your sheet. Okay? So this is a question he raises. In the context of Rabbeinu Bechaye and the Ramban, how do you fit this into the pasuk of Asher Sibru Oyevei Hayudim L'Shloi B'Laim V'Na'afoichu Yishdu Hayudim Hema V'Saineim. Let's start in the following way. Let's talk about anti-Semitism a little bit. We already began by saying that Rashi says the reason for anti-Semitism is there is no reason for anti-Semitism. On the other hand, there is a Maimer Chazal, and I will be honest with you, there are two ways of interpreting it, and the way we're going to interpret it is not really what Rashi says. The Gemara says in Masechta Shabbos Daf Peites, why is it called Har Sinai? Because when God gave us the Torah, Sinna came down. Now Rashi interprets that to mean that when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people and the Gentiles rejected the Torah, God hates the Gentiles. So according to that, it has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It's not they hate us, it's God hates them. That's how Rashi interprets it. But many Sfarim, and I saw this, but I don't know where they're getting this from, but let's say Zolzaina Zoy, there's a pshal like that. If anybody knows really the source of it, I'd be very, very indebted. But the way many Sfarim learn the explanation of this Gemara is, why is it called Har Sinai? Because when God gave us the Torah, the Gentiles were jealous of us. They feel that we think we're elitist, we think we're the chosen people, which by the way we are. We do think we're elitist. We are the chosen people. They think that we think only we are the children of God, and we do think that. And we're not embarrassed to say, only the Jewish people are the children of God. The nations of the world are not the children of God. Banim atem lashem elokeichem. They're not God's children. They're God's creations. They're created b'tselem elokim. They're not God's children. And this creates a certain jealousy, and they don't like that. In other words, there's an ethnical reason. They feel that we're elitist. We think of ourselves as better than them, which we do. And therefore, they hate us. What can we do? God selected us, Yeah, good. God selected us. So these are the two reasons for anti-Semitism. One is what Rashi says. Rashi says, Amar Rab Shimon Echai, Halacha hi biyadua, Se'esav Sainei liYaakov, that what's the reason for it? There's no reason. It is. God, the reason for anti-Semitism, according to Rashi, is that it's just a law. It's a law of nature. There's gravity, and there's, the theory of relativity, and then there's anti-Semitism. And then, on the other hand, you have this Gemara in Shabbos that the Gentiles hate us they feel that we think of ourselves as better. It's somewhat of a contradiction, right? Because either there's a reason for it, or there's not a reason for it. In fact, there's a famous comment of Rabbi Menachem Zemba, one of the great Polish Gaonim. Rabbi Menachem Zemba says, by the way, who says halacha hi biyadua she'esav sainei liYaakov? Look at Rashi. Amar Rab Shimon bar Yochai. Why Rab Shimon? Because the Gemara says Rab Shimon's shita was Rab Shimon was doiresh taima dekra. Rab Shimon expounded the reasons of every pasuk. You say a halacha. If everyone could just find the seat, it's very distracting. If you said a pasuk, Rab Shimon would tell you a reason. Rab Shimon would darshan it. Rab Shimon would explain. There was nothing in the Torah Rab Shimon couldn't explain. Rab Shimon could tell you the logic, the rationale of anything. But when it came to one concept in life, Rab Shimon just threw up his hand and says, there's no time in the Quran. There's no explanation. And that is when it comes to anti-Semitism. Rab Shimon bar Yochai says, halacha hi biyadua. It just is. They just hate us. So Rav David Cohen is trying to reconcile these two explanations and reasons for anti-Semitism. One is they're jealous of us. One is they just hate us. And how do you reconcile it? The answer is because there are two anti-Semites in the world. There's Esav and then there's Yishmael. And Yishmael hates us for ethnical reasons. They're jealous of us. That Yishmael was rejected. Yishmael didn't make it to the agada. Goresh ben ha'amazos. They hate us for religious reasons. And Esav, halacha hi biyadua she'esav zeh Yaakov. Esav just hates us. Okay, it's an interesting theory. That's what Rav David Cohen conjectures. It would fit in the following. It could come out very beautiful. If you remember the Gemara Megillah Daf Yud Gimel, the Gemara Megillah says that when Haman and Achashverosh were having this debate back and forth, you see Haman says, "Here, Achashverosh, here's $1 million. I want to kill the Jews." And the argument that Haman used to be able to annihilate the Jews was, he said, the laws of the kings they don't do. They don't keep your laws. And the Gemara Megillah says, Demafki lekule shasa b'shayupai. They say, the Haman says, Achashverosh, the Jews, they waste the whole year. Every day is another excuse why they can't work. Either Shabbos Hayom Shai, or Yom Tov Hayom, right? Everybody knows, any Jewish worker knows that, 3/4 of the year they have to go to the boss. It's Yom Tov, it's Lag B'Omer, it's Erev Pesach, it's Erev Chol HaMoed, it's Erev Sukkot, it's a 4-day Yom Tov, it's a 9-day Yom Tov, 3 days Rosh Chodesh. There's a famous joke in Yiddish, when there are 3 days Rosh Chodesh, then I'll do this and that, So in our shul, this week, they happen, for whatever reason, they happen to call out, Rosh Chodesh is going to be on Friday, Sunday, and Monday. There's a little confusion. But, it's Erev Rosh Chodesh, half the year, you don't have to work. So that's what Haman tells Achashverosh. The whole year, the Jews are wasting their time. Yamim Tovim, it's, Why is Haman using that argument to Achashverosh? Why doesn't Haman just say, hey, you hate them, you hate their gods, destroy them? That's what Haman would do if it was him, because he's an Esav guy. But now we're saying Achashverosh is a different type of anti-Semite. He hates us for a reason, so Haman has to give a reason. The reason is, the Jews are always keeping Shabbos or Yom Tov. But again, we haven't really successfully explained. We understand how Haman is the Sinai, but where do we get the Oyev into the Megillah? By the way, it's amazing, and this comes out very nice. The Gemara says, Haman offers to pay money to Achashverosh to kill the Jews. Achashverosh says, keep the cash, just kill them. And the Gemara gives the following analogy. There's a guy in his backyard, he has a mound of dirt. So he's looking for somebody to come pick up his dirt. So he calls up, John in, what is it called? The guy in Cedar Bay Park, when you have a lot of junk, you call him up. What? Bulk pickup, exactly. John from bulk pickup. You go up, send the guys. What do you got? I got boxes. He comes in the morning. It's Baruch Hashem, it's free. But sometimes you have a lot of rubbish. You got to pay. You got to call someone. You pay him a few bucks to take away your garbage. So the Gemara says Achashverosh was somebody who had a big mound in his front lawn. He was going to pay somebody to take away his garbage. Haman had a big hole in his garden. He needed to get dirt to fill up the hole. But when the two guys meet up, and Haman says, I'll pay you to fill in my hole, Achashverosh says, no, just take my dirt, I don't need it. But look carefully at the Gemara. The Gemara says that Haman is someone who has a big ditch in his yard, and Achashverosh is someone who has a big mound. Haman despises us. To Haman, we're nothing. He's just disgusted with us. We're the dirt of the earth. We're nothing. We're the absence. We don't deserve to exist. He just hates us. To Achashverosh, we're a mound. We're a high mound. He's jealous of us. He understands our heights and our greatness, but he doesn't like it. So Achashverosh and Haman are two different types of anti-Semites. Haman is the classic Esav. But the question is, what about the Oyev? How did the Oyev get involved? And now we're about to introduce one of the most fundamental questions in Jewish thought. And that is, in all the Sfarim, and you look in all the Nevi'im, there's a concept, Rabbi Glatstein, of Daled Malchios. Who are the Daled Malchios? The classic Daled Malchios are, number one, Bavel, leading off, Babylon. They destroy the first Beis HaMikdash, Nebuchadnezzar. Batting second, number two, is Paras Hamadai, right? Achashverosh. And number three is Yavan, Greece. And number four is typically Rome. They destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash. And everybody asked the following question. Well, there's somebody conspicuously absent from the list. Who's that? Yishmael. They're so powerful. They ruled the majority of the world for such a great portion of world history. Why isn't Yishmael on the list? And because of this question, the Ibn Ezra argues on most of the Rishonim, and he says Taka, number 1 is Bavel, and number 2 is Paras, and number 3 is Yavan with Rome, because Rome comes from Greece, and number 4 is Yishmael. But that's against all the Mamori Chazal, that Rome is the 4th and the last Golas Edom. And the Maharal is bothered by this question. What happened to Yishmael? And the Maharal gives 2 classic answers. And every Jew needs to be aware of these answers. Says the Maharal, answer number 1. Why is Yishmael not on the list? Says the Maharal, let me explain to you what a Malchus is. Malchus means we had the Malchus. There was something called Malchus based David, the Davidic dynasty, Shloimeh HaMelech. We have Malchus Shamayim, we are the ambassadors of God. But when Bavel destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, they usurped and they took away the majesty of the Jewish people and they took it to themselves. And then Paras took it from Bavel, and Yavan took it from Paras, and Edom took it from Yavan. They took our majesty. That's why there's this relationship between Esav and Yaakov, that when they're up, we're down, and when we're up, they're down, because it's one power that they're fighting over, they're struggling over. But Yishmael is not a Malchus, because Yishmael did not usurp Malchus Yisrael. Yishmael has not taken our Malchus. What Yishmael is an independent, they have an independent source of power. What is their independent source of power? That they're the son of Avram Avinu, and Avram Adavind, Lu Yishmael Yichya Lefanecha, and God listened to Avram's tefillah. So Yishmael is its own entity. They have not usurped our power through Bavel, through Paras, through Yavan, through Edom. They're a separate entity. That is why there is no relationship that when we're up, they're down, and when they're up, we're down. They're not connected to our power, and therefore they're not a Malchus. They don't meet the bill. They don't have the criteria necessary to meet the bill to be a Malchus. However, says the Maharal, the main answer to this question of why Yishmael is not on the list. You ready? Fasten your seatbelts. Says the Maharal, the reason why Yishmael is not on the list, they are on the list. Yishmael is Persia. That's all. Yishmael is Paras. Persians, the Persian Empire is Yishmael. But wait a second, they don't share a common ancestry. So Maharal says, Malchus is not a matter of ancestry, it's a matter of personality. And we find the Gemara in Avodah Zarah that the hallmark characteristic of the Persians, the Gemara says they build bridges and they constantly fight wars. They're very aggressive. They look to annex territory. Says the Maharal, that's exactly the hallmark characteristic of Yishmael. All day long, Yishmael, you can't make peace. Make peace with the Arabs. 2-state solution. You have a 90-state solution. There's no solution. You can't make peace with that. By the very nature, they fight wars. That's in their fabric. In fact, unbelievably, according to the Maharal, there's Gemara in Yuma, just as an aside, the Gemara has machlokes between Rebbe and an Amoira. That the last 2 nations that are going to stand are Malchus 2 Paras and Malchus 4 Edom, and it's machlokes who stands last. And I always wondered, what? I understand how you could say that Edom will stand last, but Persia's long gone. There's no Persian Empire. So now already, in these days, you could say, well, maybe it's Iran. But according to Maharal, it's very simple. When the Gemara brings the machlokes, who will stand last? Paras or Edom. Paras means Yishmael. And by the way, according to most Perushim, Yishmael will defeat Edom. So if you're getting a little comfortable in America and you think, this is the last stronghold before Mashiach comes, not according to most. According to most, Yishmael defeats Edom, and then Al Pnei Kol Echav Nafal, Yishmael falls. Ve'ela told us. Yitzchak, look at the Baal HaTurim in the beginning of Parshas told us. Mashiach comes when Yishmael falls, and after Yishmael defeats Edom. Okay, but that's for a different time. But according to Maharal, the Maharal opens up world history, and the Maharal identifies that Yishmael and Persia are one empire. Why is Yishmael not one of the 4 empires? They are Malchus Paras. Lefi zeh, it comes out, Hafla v'fela ad moed, that the union of Achashverosh and Haman is the first time in history that you have a union between the two biggest Rishaim, between the Oyev and the Soine. Can you imagine such a thing? Is it bad enough you have to deal with the Oyev? It's bad enough you have to deal with the Soine. But to have the two of them in conglomerate, to have the two of them in a pact, and now it's the combination of Haman, who's the Soine, and who's the Oyev, Achashverosh, but he's Persian. I thought Oyev is Yishmael. The Maharal says the Persians are Yishmael. Now, Marva Rabbi, what happens when Yishmael and Esav come together? By the way, Rav David Cohen asks, remember for the Lamed Shir? When was the Lamed Shir? Was last week? Yes. The Lamed Shir. Remember? So Haman tells Mordechai, climb up onto the horse. And Mordechai says, no, I'm tired, I can't get up there. So he climbs up on Haman and he gives him a kick. Yeah, he gives him a kick. And Haman says, what's going on here? B'nefalo ivecha al tismach. Wait a second. He's not the Oyev, he's the Soine. So according to Rabbeinu Bechai and the Karakemach and the Ramban, no, he's Taka the Oyev. But according to Rabbeinu Bechai and Nitzavim, he's not the Oyev, he's the Soine. So David Cohen says, don't worry, what Haman was saying is, since you're not to rejoice when your Oyev has a downfall, Kal v'chomer, you can rejoice when I have a downfall, because I'm just the Soine. Okay. There's a Gra. The Gra in the commentary to the Safra Tzniusa says, Adavar nifla ad ma'oid. Says the Gra, there are two forces of evil. There's the shar and there's the chamor. There's the ox and there's the donkey. This should be a familiar concept. The ox is Esav. Esav is the ox. Purim abirim. Who's the donkey? Shavu lachem pa'im hachamor. Yishmael is the donkey. And that's why you can't plow with an ox and donkey together. You ever wonder? You're probably wondering. You probably always wanted to know why your ox and donkey in the garage cannot be tied together. Well, this is the reason why you can't plow with your ox and donkey together. Because the shor is Esav and the chamor is Yishmael. Says the Goin, if they ever come together, they will destroy the world. So now you're getting a little picture of why Purim was the most dangerous time in the history of the world. It was the first time ever there was a gzeira. Lahashmid la regliabe. Where did that come from? We never had that before. Because it's the only time in history that there's a nice little peace treaty between the Shar and the Chamor. And when the Shar and the Chamor get together, they destroy the world. I think I mentioned many times. My grandfather writes in his memoirs that when he was in Auschwitz, Eichmann was there. He saw Eichmann, Yimach Shemai V'Zichrei. And Eichmann invited a special guest from Jerusalem, the Mufti, and they were sitting arm in arm, and Jews would pass in front of them, and they would beat them in a way that they would never be able to have children. And that was their entertainment. And that's the image. If you want to know what the Shar of a Chamor looks like, Eichmann and the Mufti is the Shar and the Chamor. And when they get together, you have an Auschwitz. They're Machrev Ha'olam. And you have a Purim. Now you understand why this was the biggest disaster. Never in our history we had a Gzeir like this. Lahashmid la regliabe. I always want, what's the pshat? The answer is, Haman and Achashverosh are the Shar of a Chamor. That's why Esav ran to marry who? The daughter of Yishmael. Because Esav knows if he's Meshadech with Yishmael, forget it. So one thing we know about history is that if Esav and Yishmael ever come together, forget it. We're in big trouble. But there's one other important thing we know about the union of Esav and Yishmael. And this is something we never spoke about. The Pasuk says in Yishmael, look at number 23. V'ra rechev, you'll see a chariot. Tzemed parashim, a pair of horsemen. Rechev chamor, a chariot of donkeys. Rechev gamal, a chariot of camels. V'hikshiv kashev, listen intently. Rav kashev, there's a lot to listen to. The Rambam writes in the Geras Teiman, Hafla v'fela, says the Rambam, if you want to know when Mashiach is coming, there is no question. After the Meshuggah gains power, Mashiach will come. But then the Rambam says, the meaning of the pasuk of Tzemed Parashim, the pair of horsemen. Who are the pair of horsemen? Says the Rambam, the last words in the Igeres Haman. His daveg shtei umay shem Edom v'Yishmael. When Edom and Yishmael come together, you will see the Chamor, the Oni v'Reichel Achar Mashiach will come. Says the Rambam, you want a simon, everybody wants to know a simon. How do we know when Mashiach is coming? When Edom and Yishmael come together, that is a sure sign Mashiach is coming. So David Cohen wants to know, so then why, after the Purim story, did Mashiach not come? According to the Rambam, the Igeres Haman, Esav and Ishmael coming together brings Mashiach, and now we're learning that who's the Oyev? The Oyev is Achashverosh. By the way, just fitting it into the pasuk, it's not great. Bayoim asher sibru oyevei haYehudim lishloit bohem. On the day the Oyev planned to destroy us, that's better read if Oyev refers to Haman. And the Megillah is saying, and not only that, v'nabaichu, we even ruled over the Sinai. It fits a little bit better with Rabbeinu Bechai and the Kana Kemach. But the Oyev and the Sinai, either way, are Esav and Yishmael. So David Cohen wants to know, so why didn't Mashiach come? So first of all, I would say, well, wait a second. They were pretty awfully close. First of all, you know that right after the story, Klal Yisrael Merkabah Torah Pebe'ava, Ezra and Nehemiah went up to Yerushalayim. They rebuilt the second Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara says, had everybody come up, Mashiach would have come. So look, there are no guarantees in life. It's a sure sign Mashiach could come. We still have to do our part. We didn't do our part. But the truth is, they did rebuild the second Beis Hamikdash, and it had the potential to bring Mashiach. But Rav David Cohen says very simply, the reason Mashiach didn't come is because that union quickly broke up. Because Haman was hanged, and that was the end of his davgus of the Shar and the Chamor. But then he says a little bit better. He says like this. The Gemara says, anybody know in Tehillim, which is the Perek in Tehillim that talks about the Purim story? Perek? 22. Perek Chav Beis, Lam Natseach, Ala Yelas HaShachar, Mizmor LeDavid, Keli Lama Zavtani. And the Gemara in Yuma Daf Chav Tes asks, why is Esther compared to the Ayelas HaShachar, to the morning star? Says the Gemara in Yuma, just like the morning star is the end of the night, so too Esther is the last miracle. The Gemara asks, what do you mean Hanukkah is the last miracle? Hanukkah happened after. And the Gemara answers, no, Hanukkah was never recorded. Esther is the last miracle recorded. Now, using the principle of Masayavoy Siman Labanim, we know whatever takes place in Chumash is the pre-enactment, is the architectural plans for the rest of history. So if Esther is the last miracle, it probably is the pre-enactment and what creates the Gula HaSida. So if Mashiach can't come in the written script, then history would never play out. But at least the final written architectural plan is, like the Rambam says, the union of Achashverosh and Haman, which is Esav and Yishmael, and that brings Binyan Beis HaMikdash, so that in the future, when that happens, it will bring Mashiach. Why did Mashiach come? That's the second era of history. It's not going to be in the first volume of history. So we have an amazing view and observation here of the Megillah. It's a completely revolutionary way of understanding the Megillah. That yes, Achashverosh is a nice Persian, and you view him, he's a guy, he likes to eat, he likes to party, and he's a little bit of hafachfach, he wavers, and we always view, Esav as the big anti-Semite. But according to this understanding, and if you apply the reading of Rabbeinu Chaim Ramban to Megillah Esther, the real problem here is Achashverosh. He's the Yishmaeli. He's the Oyev. He's the Oyev. So I have one question. When Achashverosh asks Esther cries to Achashverosh, Kinim karnu ani ve'ami lehashmel ha'regli abed. I'm sold. If we would only be slaves, I would have kept my mouth closed. But now we're going to be destroyed. So Achashverosh says, who's the guy? Who's trying to harm you? Va'atomer Esther ish sar ve'oyev Haman harazeh. She calls him what? Oyev. But he's not an oyev, he's the soine. Why is she calling him the oyev? Wrong name, Esther. Esther says, come on, you don't know the Gemara Megillah. The Gemara Megillah says, what's going on over here? Ish tsar v'oyev Haman. Let her just answer Haman. What's all these titles? Says the Gemara, she pointed to Achashverosh when she said Ish tsar v'oyev. And the Malach came and moved her finger to Haman. When she said Ish tsar v'oyev, she was referring to Achashverosh. So here we have it, clear as day. It's clear as day. She's calling Achashverosh the oyev. Why? Because he's Persian. And Paras is Yishmael. So it's not a kasha on what we're saying. It's a raya brura to exactly what we're saying, that Achashverosh is the oyev. Okay? This is how Reb David Cohen, this is the way we're presenting how he develops the idea. Okay, Ad Kan from the Sefer El David. Just I want to share with you my personal observation here. And that is, there's something more here. It's not just that Haman is from Esav and Achashverosh is Yishmael. And let me explain to you one thing. I have a question for you. Is Haman just from Esav and Achashverosh is Yishmael? Is Haman just Esav, or is Haman more than Esav? Haman is Amalek. What is Amalek? Is Amalek an oyev, or is Amalek a soine? It's interesting, Rashi on the pasuk Ki Yad al Kes Ka, Rashi says when Mashiach comes, the Yud K will be Yud K Vav K, and the case will be Kisei. And Rashi says the following, number 31, when his name is wiped out, Yeh Hashem Shalem, V'Hakisei Shalem, Shenemar Ha'oyev Tamu. The enemy will be vanquished. Rashi says Amalek is the oyev. Really? Amalek is an oyev? I thought Amalek comes from Esav and they're a soine. Does anybody know what the klipa of Amalek is called? We said that Esav is a shar and Yishmael is a chamar. And what's Amalek? Amalek is called a kelev. In fact, in Parak Chav Beis of Tehillim, Esther davens Hatzila Mecherev Nafshi. Look at number 32. What's Hatzila Mecherev Nafshi? It's Rashi Tevois. What? Hatzila Mecherev Nafshi. What's that Rashi Tevois? Haman. Miyad Kelev, the Marsha says. Amalek is the klipa of the Kelev. By the way, the Gra in his commentary Yahel Ar, which is a Kabbalistic commentary to Tanakh, he says there are three forces of evil in the world. The Shar, which is Esav, is Kas, and the Chamar, the Shar, which is Esav, is Kas. The Chamar, which is Yishmael, is Taiva, and then there's the Kelev. What does that spell out? What does Chamar, Shar, Kelev spell? Rashi Tevois? Choshech, darkness. There are three forces of evil. Chamar, Shar, Kelev. So I would have said, well, maybe there are three different forces of evil. There's Chamar, Shar, and Kelev. And the Gra says in the Adaras Eliyahu, no. There's Chamar is the Tata, or the Mama. The Shar is the Tata. And the union of Esav and Yishmael produces Amalek. The union of Esav and Yishmael produces Amalek. There's the Shar, which is Esav, the Chamar, which is Yishmael, and Amalek is the union of the two. In fact, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver writes, look at number 37, Choshech hu gimel klipos, Chamar Shar Kelev, Chamar v'Shar Yamino Smaila, Kelev Amalek be'emtza nafak mi beinayhu. Comes from the two of them. By the way, the Zohar HaKadosh in Parashat Shal says it's clear that the Shar, the Chamar, and the union of the two produces Amalek. So just wondering, if Amalek is the product of Esav and Yishmael, maybe that would explain why Rashi refers to Amalek as the Oyev, because he's really the two. He's a Soine and an Oyev. So you're going to give him a name, you give him the worst name, you give him the Oyev name. But just one point, if Amalek already is a union of Esav and Yishmael, then why does Haman need to join forces with Achashverosh. Haman is not just a Sinai and Esav guy, he's an Amaleki. So he's got everything already. So what does he need Achashverosh for? So maybe we could explain as follows, that Amalek, where does Amalek come from? Eliphaz. Eliphaz was not a descendant of Yishmael. Esav married Yishmael, his daughter, Machalas. But Eliphaz did not come from that union. So there was a concept of Amalek in the world. There was a family line of Amalek in the world. But that line had not yet unified together with Yishmael. It was not until the Purim story did we have this. We had an Amalek. We had a person named Amalek. We had a mitzvah to destroy Amalek. But the poison of Amalek and the venom of Amalek and the ability for Amalek to destroy the world had not yet been created and not come down until Haman joined in with Achashverosh. Or it could be that, even if Haman was an Amaleki, but even Amalek always needs Yishmael to unify with, to be able to destroy the world. So Rabbi say, what we're presenting now is really a historic observation on Megillah Esther. That Megillah Esther represents the period in history, the one time in history where we had this pact between Esav and Yishmael, which, according to the Gemara, brings destruction to the world, which it could have, but according to the Rambam, is the surest sign of Mashiach coming. And we should be zoiche the taka. This is a Masei Avos Simon Labanim, that the story of Purim was a pre-enactment. Through the story of Purim, the second Beis HaMikdash was built, and we hope that through our Purim, it will create the Bias Gal Tzedek Meher Yameinu. Amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.